The massive hall floated in space above the planet Zenthra Prime like a giant metal crown. Inside this structure, hundreds of alien species gathered for another session of the Galactic Council. The year was 2347, and humanity had been trying to join this council for decades. Today, Ambassador. Peter Collins stood before them with a simple request that would change everything. Peter cleared his throat and spoke into the translation device that would carry his words to every species present. He asked for military protection for human colonies on the frontier worlds. The Zarthak marauders had been attacking human settlements for 3 years now. 3 colonies had been destroyed completely. 12,000 people lived on New Boston Colony, and the raiders were heading there next. The response from the council was not what Peter had hoped for. Laughter filled the enormous chamber. Not polite disagreement, but actual mocking laughter that echoed from 1,000 different alien throats and communication devices. Lord Zethan of the Vraxian Collective rose from his seat. His insect body clicked and chittered as he spoke. He reminded everyone that humans had only discovered faster than light travel 60 years ago. He said human shields were primitive and their weapons still used basic projectile technology. His compound eyes gleamed with amusement as he delivered his assessment. Supreme General Vorth of the Korath Dominion was next to speak. The massive reptilian commander looked down at Peter with obvious contempt. He hissed that humans were like children playing with dangerous toys. He suggested that perhaps humanity should have stayed in their little solar system if they could not handle the dangers of space. Lady Sylvana of the Sylvari Commonwealth floated above her platform. Her body was pure energy that pulsed and shifted with her emotions. She told the council that her people had been watching humanity for years. She said humans fought among themselves constantly. She said they had poisoned their own planet with pollution and waste. Why should the council waste resources protecting a species that could not even protect itself? Dr. Linda Morrison stood beside Peter. She was a scientist and diplomat who had spent her whole career trying to build bridges between humanity and the galaxy. Her hands clenched into fists as she listened to the insults. Finally, she stepped forward and spoke. She reminded the council that humanity had survived ice ages and plagues and wars. She said that being young did not mean being weak. She asked for the same basic consideration that any member species should receive. Elder Caney of the Thandros Empire listened to her words. His species had existed for 50,000 years, and he had personally lived for 3,000. He spoke with a voice that carried the weight of millennia. He told the humans that they had nothing to offer the council. No useful technology, no rare resources that could not be found elsewhere, no military power worth considering. He suggested that in another 1,000 years humanity might be ready for true membership, but not today. Captain Jacob Hayes sat in the human delegation area, watching everything unfold. He was 45 years old and had spent 20 years in Earth's Navy. His military uniform was pressed and perfect, but his jaw was tight with anger. Across the room, he could see Admiral Claire Bennett appearing as a hologram. She was 58 and commanded all of Earth's defense forces. Their eyes met, and a silent understanding passed between them. The council did not know what humanity had been building in secret. The vote was called, and the results were devastating. 412 species voted against helping humanity. Only 17 voted in favor. 23 abstained from voting at all. The message was clear. Humanity did not matter to the galaxy. As the human delegation prepared to leave the chamber, one more insult came their way. The Zarthak ambassador was a grotesque creature, with 6 independent eyes arranged around a bulbous head. He made a threatening gesture toward Peter and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. He told the humans to prepare their colonies because, without council protection, they belonged to the Zarthak now. Back in their quarters, the human delegation held an emergency meeting. Admiral Bennett's hologram flickered in the center of the room. The lighting was dim and everyone looked exhausted. They had spent months preparing for this presentation. They had hoped that reason and diplomacy would win the day. They had been wrong. Admiral Bennett spoke first. She said that the council had made their position clear. Humanity was alone. Peter Collins slumped in his chair. 60 years of diplomatic effort had just been thrown away. The galaxy saw humans as nothing more than primitive newcomers who did not deserve respect. Dr. Linda Morrison pulled up a holographic star chart. Red markers indicated the location of human colonies. A cluster of orange dots showed the approaching Zarthak fleet. She said intelligence suggested the attack on New Boston would happen within a week. 12,000 civilians lived there. Most were families who had left Earth looking for a better life on the frontier. Jacob Hayes stood and walked to the window. He stared out at the stars for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. He said it was time. Everyone turned to look at him with questions in their eyes. Peter Collins asked what Jacob meant. Jacob turned back to face the room. He said it was time to show the galaxy what humanity had really been working on for the past 30 years. It was time to activate Project Seventh Gate. Admiral Bennett's hologram smiled, but there was no humor in it. She said she had hoped it would not come to this. She had wanted the galaxy to accept humanity on their own terms, but the Council had made their choice. She said she would contact General Kyle Murphy at the research facility immediately. They were bringing the Sentinel home. Linda Morrison's eyes went wide. She asked if the Dimensional Research Project had actually worked. Jacob nodded. He said it had worked beyond their wildest expectations. The ship had been operational for 5 years. Humanity had kept it secret, hoping that diplomacy would be enough. Now they knew the truth. The galaxy only respected power. Peter asked what would happen now. Jacob explained that a message would be sent on a frequency that existed outside normal space. At a classified research station orbiting Neptune, that message would be received. The crew there had been waiting for this moment. The human delegation boarded their transport ship called the Endeavor. As they left the Council station behind, Peter looked back at the massive structure. For decades, humans had dreamed of being accepted as equals in the galactic community. Today, that dream had died, but perhaps something better would take its place. Deep in the outer solar system, far from Earth, a signal was received. At a research facility built into the frozen surface of Neptune's moon, Triton computers began processing the encrypted message. Technicians who had been waiting years for this moment jumped into action. In the massive hangar bay at the heart of the facility, a ship waited. The Sentinel had been built using physics that the rest of the galaxy did not understand. It existed partially in dimensions beyond normal space, and now it was being activated. The response was transmitted back through the same impossible frequency. Just 3 words that would change everything. Acknowledged. The Sentinel is ready. The galaxy had laughed at humanity. They had mocked human weakness and dismissed human potential. They thought they understood the rules of the game. They were about to learn that humanity had stopped playing by their rules a long time ago. New Boston Colony sat at the edge of human-controlled space like a small jewel on a dark canvas. 12,000 people called this world home. They had come here looking for opportunity and a fresh start. The planet was rich in rare minerals that Earth needed desperately. Governor Helen Brooks stood in her office looking at reports that made her stomach turn. The Galactic Council had refused to help. The Zarthak fleet was coming. She had 4 days to prepare. Helen had been a military officer before becoming governor. She was 44 years old and had seen combat during the border skirmishes with pirates 10 years ago. She knew what needed to be done even if she did not like it. She called her staff together and gave orders. All civilians would go to the underground shelters immediately. Every person with military training would report to defensive positions. Someone needed to find Lieutenant Commander Danny Walsh right away. Danny arrived at the governor's office within minutes. He was 27 years old and had been flying patrol missions around the colony for 3 years. He was young but good at his job. Helen showed him the holographic display floating above her desk. 27 Zarthak warships were heading toward them. The enemy would arrive in 4 days. Earth was sending help, but the reinforcements would not get there in time. Danny studied the tactical display with growing dread. New Boston had 12 orbital defense platforms surrounding the planet. 8 small patrol craft provided additional protection. Against 27 enemy warships, they would not last long. He asked how many people could be evacuated before the attack began. Helen explained that transport ships were already being loaded. They could get maybe 3,000 people off-world before the Zarthak arrived. That meant 9,000 would stay behind. Her voice remained steady, but Danny could see the pain in her eyes. Most of the people staying were families with children who could not fit on the transports. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Admiral Claire Bennett stood in the Command Operations Center, buried deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. The massive room was filled with officers monitoring holographic displays that showed every human ship in space. A young lieutenant gave her a status report. 6 battleships were close enough to reach New Boston, but they were badly outgunned. Analysis suggested the colony would fall within 6 hours of the first attack. Claire asked about the Sentinel. The lieutenant reported that Dr. Richard Pierce was beginning the dimensional transition sequence at the Neptune facility. The ship should be fully operational within 48 hours. Claire shook her head. That was not fast enough. She opened a secure communication channel and called Captain Jacob Hayes. Jacob appeared on the holographic display. He was still aboard the Endeavour, traveling back from the council station. He had heard the news about New Boston. Claire told him to change course immediately. He needed to go to the Neptune facility and take direct command of the Sentinel. They were moving up the timeline. Jacob pointed out that the crew was not fully trained yet. Some of them had never been in real combat. Claire leaned closer to the camera. She reminded him that those were their people at New Boston, their families and friends. She asked if 30 years of research and development had been wasted. Jacob was silent for a long moment, then nodded. He ordered his pilot to set course for Neptune. They would arrive in 18 hours. At the Neptune research facility, Dr. Richard Pierce stood at an observation window staring at humanity's greatest achievement. The facility had been built into Triton, which was Neptune's largest moon. But the structure was tiny compared to the ship docked in the center hangar. The Sentinel stretched 800 meters from bow to stern. It looked like a standard human warship with sharp angles and dark armor plating, but appearances were deceiving. This ship existed partially in dimensions beyond normal space. Commander Sophie Turner joined Pierce at the window. She was 35 years old and served as military liaison for the project. She asked if Pierce still had doubts about what they had built. Pierce smiled slightly. He admitted that he questioned their work every single day. They had been manipulating fundamental physics and playing with dimensions that should not be accessible. If the mathematics were wrong, the consequences could be catastrophic. Sophie reminded him that Captain Hayes was coming. The Admiral wanted the Sentinel deployed within 48 hours. That was ahead of their planned schedule. Pierce pulled up a holographic interface showing system diagnostics. The dimensional anchors were stable. The phase drives were operating at 97% efficiency. The weapon systems were revolutionary and terrifying in equal measure. Pierce spoke quietly about what they had really created. Every other species in the galaxy thought in 3 spatial dimensions. They had built their entire understanding of warfare and physics around that framework. The Sentinel operated in 7 dimensions. It could appear and disappear at will. It could strike from angles that should not exist. The enemy would not be able to comprehend what was happening to them. Back at New Boston Colony, the evacuation was proceeding as quickly as possible. Lieutenant Commander Danny Walsh supervised the loading of the last transport ship. Families rushed aboard carrying whatever belongings they could manage. A small girl around 6 years old looked up at Danny with wide, frightened eyes. She asked if the monsters were really coming. Danny knelt down to her level. He promised that nothing bad would happen to her. The girl's mother thanked him and pulled her daughter onto the ship. Danny watched them go, knowing he had just lied to a child. Governor Helen Brooks joined Danny at the landing pad. She reported that 3,200 people were evacuated. That left 9,000 still on the planet. Danny pointed out that 9,000 people were staying to fight. Helen corrected him. She said these were not just people but fighters. Every adult who volunteered to stay knew the risks. They would not surrender their home without a battle. Admiral Bennett assembled Earth's top military commanders for a secure conference. Dozens of officers appeared as holograms in the chamber. She told them that humanity stood at a crossroads. For 60 years they had tried to earn respect through diplomacy and peaceful cooperation. Today they learned that respect was not given freely. It had to be taken. She explained that Project Seventh Gate had been conceived 30 years ago, when human scientists first discovered higher dimensional mathematics. While the rest of the galaxy refined conventional technology, humanity had asked a different question. What if warfare itself could be fundamentally reimagined? The Sentinel was the answer to that question. The holographic display showed technical schematics of the ship, though most details were classified. Bennett told the assembled commanders that in 2 days, the Sentinel would enter combat for the first time. The galaxy that laughed at humanity would learn what happened when humans stopped following the old rules. Jacob Hayes arrived at the Neptune facility and immediately boarded the Sentinel. The ship felt alive with barely contained energy. Systems hummed that existed partially in dimensions beyond human perception. He took the captain's chair on the bridge. 80 crew members surrounded him, representing the best and brightest people Earth had to offer. Dr. Pierce stood at the science station ready to monitor the dimensional systems. Jacob activated the ship-wide communication system. He told his crew that they were about to do something unprecedented in the history of warfare. They would show the galaxy why humanity should never be underestimated. He looked at the main view screen showing the stars beyond. He ordered the helm officer to prepare for dimensional transition. They were going to New Boston Colony, and they were taking a shortcut through the 7th dimension. The Sentinel began to change. Its hull shimmered and blurred as it started phasing out of normal space. Within minutes, the ship would disappear completely from conventional sensors. It would travel through dimensions that the enemy could not perceive or understand. The rescue mission had begun. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity had been hiding something extraordinary, and the laughter was about to stop. The bridge of the Sentinel looked like no other warship humans had ever built. The main view screen did not just show space, but layers of reality itself. Dimensions folded into and away from each other in ways that made the human eye struggle to understand what it was seeing. Lieutenant Amy Chen sat at the navigation console with her hands moving across controls that managed systems. Existing in 7 different dimensions at once, Amy reported that they had achieved full dimensional transition. The ship now existed primarily in the 7th dimension with only a partial projection into normal space. Captain Jacob Hayes gripped his command chair as reality bent around them. Through the view screen, normal space looked like a flat surface, and somehow they were above it or beside it or through it. The usual rules of physics did not apply here. Dr. Richard Pierce asked Jacob how it felt to travel this way. Jacob admitted it felt like falling and standing still at the same time. He asked how long it would take to reach New Boston Colony. Amy checked her instruments carefully. In 7th dimensional space, distance worked differently than in normal space. What would normally take 3 days would only take 6 hours at their current speed. Commander Greg Foster was the tactical officer, and he pulled up displays showing the enemy fleet. He was 39 years old and had studied Zarthak military tactics for years. He reported that the enemy ships were moving through normal space toward the colony. They would arrive in 47 hours. The Zarthak had no idea the Sentinel was nearby. From their perspective, the human ship simply did not exist. Pierce observed that they were outside the enemy's reality completely. The Zarthak could not see them or detect them, or even comprehend that such a thing was possible. Jacob studied the tactical display showing 27 enemy warships. Each one was designed to terrorize colonies and overwhelm defenses through sheer firepower. The Zarthak had been raiding human settlements for 3 years, always hitting targets too far away for quick help. Jacob spoke quietly about how the enemy thought they were hunters. It was time to teach them a different lesson. Meanwhile, the Zarthak flagship called Bloodfang cut through space like a predator closing in on prey. Warlord Krathik sat on his command throne. He was a massive creature with 6 eyes arranged around a bulbous head. His skin was covered in thick scales, and his mouth held rows of sharp teeth. Krathik demanded a status report on the human colony. His second officer bowed low before speaking. The humans had evacuated about a quarter of their population. The rest were fortifying their defenses. Intelligence reports suggested New Boston had 12 orbital platforms and minimal ship support. Krathik laughed, and the sound was wet and rasping. He said humans were predictable. They always thought they could fight back. His fleet had crushed 17 human colonies already. This one would be no different. The second officer mentioned that Earth had been denied protection at the Galactic Council. Krathik stood up from his throne. His massive form towered over everyone on the bridge. He said, of course, the Council refused to help. Humans were weak and had no allies. They possessed no advanced weapons and no reason for the galaxy to care about them. His fleet would take the colony's minerals and resources. They would leave the settlement burning. And the galaxy would do nothing because humanity did not matter. At New Boston Colony, Governor Helen Brooks watched a countdown clock on her display. 45 hours remained until the Zarthak arrived. Lieutenant Paul Anderson was 33 years old and served as defensive coordinator. He showed Helen the arrangements they had made. All orbital platforms were positioned in a defensive sphere around the colony center. Every civilian was in underground shelters. Their 8 patrol ships were armed and ready. Helen asked how long they could hold out against the enemy fleet. Paul hesitated before answering. Best-case scenario was 4 hours. The Zarthak would overwhelm their platforms quickly. Once the enemy achieved orbital superiority, they would begin ground bombardment. Helen nodded slowly. She said they would make those 4 hours count. Every minute they survived was another minute for help to arrive. Paul pointed out respectfully that help was not coming. The Council had denied protection. Earth's fleet was too far away to reach them in time. Helen's voice was firm when she responded. She said Admiral Bennett had not survived 40 years in the Navy by accepting defeat. If the Admiral said help was coming, then something was coming. They just needed to survive long enough to see what it was. Aboard the Sentinel, the crew was adapting to the strange experience of seventh-dimensional travel. Amy Chen explained the navigation system to junior officers. She told them to imagine normal space as a flat piece of paper. Regular ships traveled along the surface of that paper. But the Sentinel operated in a dimension perpendicular to that reality. From this higher perspective, they could observe everything below, but nothing down there could observe them back. A young officer asked if that meant they were invisible. Amy said it was more than invisibility. They literally did not exist in the enemy's frame of reference. It was like asking a drawing on paper to perceive something floating above the page. The very concept was outside normal understanding. Commander Greg Foster ran tactical simulations with his team. He explained that conventional warfare had a fundamental problem. Everyone played on the same field using the same physics and the same spatial dimensions. The Sentinel changed all of that. In normal combat, ships maneuvered in 3 dimensions trying to outposition each other. Weapons traveled through predictable space. Shields blocked attacks from predictable angles. But the Sentinel could strike from the 7th dimension. Greg described an enemy ship moving through space confident in its shields and armor. Then suddenly a weapon appeared inside the shield perimeter, having traveled through a dimension the enemy could not perceive or block. One of the tactical officers said that was not warfare but assassination. Jacob entered the tactical bay. He said it was not assassination but evolution. For decades, humanity tried to fight the galaxy on their terms. Humans built ships like everyone else and weapons like everyone else. They followed the same rules. And the galaxy laughed at them. The Sentinel represented something different. Not because humans were stronger, but because they were thinking in ways others could not comprehend. Dr. Pierce reported they were approaching New Boston's position in dimensional space. They were still 24 hours ahead of the Zarthak fleet. Jacob said that gave them time to prepare properly. He ordered Greg to complete a full tactical analysis of every enemy ship. He wanted to know capabilities and weaknesses for each vessel. Greg confirmed he was already working on it. He had studied Zarthak tactics for years. They were brutal but predictable. They relied on overwhelming force and terror. Jacob said the enemy was about to learn that terror worked both ways. 6 hours before the Zarthak fleet would arrive, the Sentinel took position near New Boston Colony. But instead of revealing itself, the ship remained phased into the 7th dimension. It was invisible and intangible to all conventional sensors. Governor Helen Brooks received a communication on a secure frequency she did not know existed. A voice identified itself as Captain Jacob Hayes of the Earth Navy vessel Sentinel. He said they were there to help. Helen looked around her command center in confusion. Her sensors showed no ships anywhere in the system. Jacob explained they were operating in dimensional space outside normal detection range. In 5 hours, the Zarthak would arrive. He needed Helen to do exactly what the enemy expected. Put up a brave fight, make them commit their forces, draw them close to the colony. Helen pointed out they did not have firepower to survive a long battle. Jacob told her she would not have to survive long. Just 10 minutes. His crew would handle everything else. Helen asked what exactly he had brought to this fight. There was a pause before Jacob answered. His voice was cold and certain when he spoke. He said they had brought evolution. The Zarthak fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. Warlord Krathik surveyed his forces with satisfaction. He ordered all ships into battle formation. They would crush the humans and take what belonged to the strong. In the colony, alarms began to sound. Governor Helen Brooks opened communication to everyone on the planet. She told them the enemy had arrived. All defensive forces should take their positions. They would show the Zarthak that humanity did not surrender. High above the planet, existing in a dimension the enemy could not perceive, the Sentinel waited in perfect silence. The battle was about to begin. The first weapons from the Zarthak fleet tore through space like lightning. Plasma bolts and kinetic projectiles hammered into New Boston's orbital defenses. 3 platforms exploded immediately as their shields were overwhelmed by the massive firepower. The remaining 9 platforms returned fire, but their weapons barely scratched the enemy's advanced armor. Governor Helen Brooks watched the tactical display on the colony surface. She forced herself to remain calm even though her heart was racing. She ordered all defensive platforms to execute Pattern Delta. They needed to draw the enemy closer to the planet. Lieutenant Paul Anderson coordinated the defense from his station. He reported they were losing platforms faster than expected. At this rate, they would be completely exposed in 7 minutes. Helen thought about Captain Hayes and his mysterious ship. He had said to hold for 10 minutes. Just 10 minutes and help would arrive. She told Paul that those 7 minutes had to count. Every second they survived mattered. Warlord Krathix watched the battle from his throne aboard the Bloodfang. He was pleased with how easily the human defenses were crumbling. He ordered all ships to advance. He wanted to see fear on human faces when the ground bombardment began. The Zarthak fleet moved forward in a tight formation. 27 warships converged on the colony like a massive fist closing around its target. They were completely confident and certain of victory.
They had done this 17 times before against other human colonies.
This would be no different. Aboard the Sentinel, Captain Jacob Hayes counted down the time. 8 minutes had passed since the battle started. Commander Greg Foster studied his tactical display with intense concentration. All 27 enemy ships were marked and targeted. He had identified the optimal strike points on each vessel. The flagship Bloodfang was the priority target. Lieutenant Amy Chen reported that all dimensional anchors were stable. They could phase into normal space whenever Jacob gave the command. They could maintain stability for up to 40 minutes before needing to retreat back to 7th dimensional space to recharge. Dr. Richard Pierce monitored the exotic energy readings. He reminded Jacob that what they were about to do had never been attempted outside controlled conditions. They would exist in 2-dimensional states simultaneously while executing combat maneuvers. Jacob acknowledged the risk, but said the people below did not have time for caution. He activated the ship-wide communication system. He told his crew they had trained for this moment 1,000 times in simulations. Now they would show the galaxy what happened when humanity innovated instead of imitated. He contacted Governor Brooks and told her to keep her people clear of the engagement zone. Helen's voice came back tense but steady. She told him to give the enemy hell. Jacob ordered Tactical to prepare primary weapons. Navigation would plot a phase strike pattern through the enemy formation.
Engineering would divert all power to dimensional stabilizers.
Across the ship, the crew moved with practiced precision. Greg announced that all stations reported ready. Jacob looked at the tactical display showing the Zarthak fleet closing in on the defenseless colony. He said it was time to teach the galaxy the most important lesson in human history. Humanity adapts. The dimensional phase transition began. The Sentinel came into normal space. But the word appeared was too simple for what actually happened. One instant the space was completely empty. The next instant the Sentinel existed as if reality had simply decided the ship had always been there. The Zarthak sensors went wild with confusion and alarm. On the Bloodfang, a sensor officer shouted in panic. An unknown contact had just materialized directly ahead. It appeared from nothing. Warlord Krathix jumped to his feet. He demanded to know how a ship could bypass their sensor networks. That should be impossible. But the Sentinel was there, hovering in space between the Zarthak fleet and New Boston colony. Compared to the massive enemy battleships, it looked almost small. Just one ship against 27. Krathix opened a communication channel. He identified himself and ordered the unknown vessel to withdraw immediately or be destroyed. On the Sentinel's bridge, Jacob opened a channel that broadcast to the entire Zarthak fleet and to the colony below. His voice was calm and conversational. He told Krathix that the warlord had made 2 critical mistakes. First, he assumed humanity was weak because they were young. Second, he assumed he understood the rules of engagement. Jacob nodded to Greg Foster. The tactical officer pressed controls and the Sentinel's weapons activated. What happened next would be studied by military experts across the galaxy for decades. The Sentinel did not move in any conventional way. Instead, it phased flickering in and out of normal space. One moment it was in front of the Zarthak fleet. The next moment it was somehow inside their formation between ships that should have blocked its path. Krathix whispered that such movement was impossible. Their sensors could not track the human ship. The Sentinels' weapons were unlike anything the Zarthak had encountered. Instead of firing through normal space, the weapons were partially anchored in the seventh dimension. When they fired, the ordnance simply appeared at the target, having traveled through a dimension the enemy could not shield against. The first strike hit a Zarthak cruiser called Razorwind. But the explosion did not come from outside the ship. It manifested inside the vessel, bypassing shields and armor completely. The cruiser broke apart in seconds as its interior structure was destroyed. Krathix roared orders to raise shields to maximum and target the human ship. The entire Zarthak fleet opened fire with everything they had. Hundreds of weapons discharged at once. It was enough firepower to vaporize a small moon, the space where the Sentinel had been erupted in blinding light. Energy weapons and kinetic projectiles converged on the target. But the Sentinel was not there anymore. It phased out of normal space a fraction of a second before impact. All those weapons hit empty space. A Zarthak tactical officer screamed, asking where the ship had gone. The Sentinel reappeared behind the fleet, already firing again. 2 more Zarthak ships exploded from internal detonations. Their shields were designed to stop external attacks and were useless against weapons striking from higher dimensions. Greg Foster coordinated the assault with ruthless efficiency. He called out targets and fired in rapid succession. Amy Chen managed the phase transitions, cycling between normal space and the 7th dimension to maintain optimal attack positions. The Zarthak fleet had been designed to overwhelm conventional opposition through superior numbers and firepower, but they could not track the Sentinel's movements. They could not predict where it would appear next. Their shields provided no protection. Their tactical doctrines, refined over centuries of conquest, were suddenly obsolete. 5 ships were destroyed, then 10, then 15. Warlord Krathix finally understood the situation. He ordered all ships to retreat and scatter formation. But Jacob Hayes had studied Zarthak tactics carefully. He knew they would try to run. He told Greg to cut off their escape vectors. He wanted continuous phase strikes on the command ship. The Sentinel flickered through rapid phase transitions, appearing at multiple points around the battlefield in quick succession. To the remaining Zarthak ships, it seemed like there were multiple enemy vessels attacking from all directions. The psychological impact was devastating. 3 Zarthak ships collided with each other in panic. 2 more were caught in crossfire from their own fleet as they shot desperately at the Sentinel's last known position. 20 ships destroyed, then 22, then 25. Only the Bloodfang and 1 escort remained. Krathix stared at his tactical display in disbelief. An entire fleet had been reduced to burning wreckage in less than 15 minutes. 1 human ship had done this. Just 1 ship. He muttered that it was impossible. The Sentinel phased into existence directly in front of the Bloodfang. It was so close that weapons could not miss. Jacob's voice came over the communication channel, cold and final. He told Krathix that the warlord had come to terrorize a colony and murder civilians. He had come to prove humanity was weak. He was wrong. Krathix started to say they surrendered. He began to invoke the laws of the Galactic Council. Jacob interrupted him. He asked what laws Krathix meant. The laws of the Council that refused to protect human colonies. The laws that left civilians defenseless. He said the warlord would learn today that humanity made its own laws now. The Sentinel fired one last time. The weapon, anchored in the 7th dimension, appeared directly inside the Bloodfang's reactor core. The explosion was visible from the surface of New Boston Colony like a brief new sun in orbit. The last escort ship managed to jump to faster than light speed and fled the system in complete terror. The Sentinel phased back to normal space above the colony. The orbital area was filled with debris from the destroyed Zarthak fleet. Governor Helen Brooks opened a communication channel. Her voice shook slightly as she asked what they had just witnessed. Jacob looked at the tactical display showing the colony now safe and the enemy fleet that no longer existed. He told her she had just witnessed the future of human warfare. On the colony surface, civilians emerged from shelters to see the glowing debris field in the night sky. Lieutenant Commander Danny Walsh stood watching the distant explosions fade. The little girl who had asked about monsters tugged on his uniform. She asked if the monsters woo. 3 weeks after the Battle of New Boston, the Galactic Assembly Hall was more crowded than it had been in decades. Representatives from every major civilization and hundreds of minor species filled the chamber. In the center, the human delegation sat with a confidence that had not been there before. Ambassador Peter Collins stood at the speaker's platform, but he was not alone. Captain Jacob Hayes stood beside him in full military uniform. Behind them, on a massive display screen, Admiral Claire Bennett appeared as a hologram. Peter began speaking, and his voice carried across the vast chamber. He reminded everyone that 3 weeks ago he had stood before the council requesting protection for human colonies. The request had been denied by an overwhelming majority. Everyone in the room knew what happened next. The Zarthak fleet that threatened New Boston Colony had been completely destroyed. Every single ship and every raider. They came expecting an easy victory against a defenseless target, but found something else entirely. Peter gestured to Jacob, who stepped forward. The display changed to show tactical recordings from the Sentinel. The assembled aliens watched in stunned silence as the battle unfolded. The human ship phased through dimensions, striking from impossible angles, destroying an entire fleet in minutes. Jacob explained that what they were witnessing was Earth's newest class of warship called the Sentinel. Unlike conventional vessels that operated in 3 spatial dimensions, the Sentinel could transition into and out of higher dimensional space, specifically what humans called the 7th dimension. Lord Zethan of the Vraxians interrupted, clicking his mandibles rapidly. He said this violated fundamental physics. Higher dimensional travel was theoretically impossible. His species' greatest scientists had proven this over millennia of research. Dr. Linda Morrison stood and addressed the chamber. She said with respect that those scientists were wrong. Or more accurately, they were limited by conventional thinking. Humans had only been studying advanced physics for a few centuries. They came to the problem without preconceptions. They did not know it was impossible, so they figured out how to do it anyway. Lady Sylvana of the Sylvari spoke next. Her energy form pulsed with agitation. She said humans had created a weapon that made conventional warfare obsolete. Ships that could not be tracked, that could strike through shields that existed outside normal space. She asked if humans understood the implications. Admiral Bennett's hologram responded immediately. She said humanity understood completely. That was exactly why they were presenting this information to the Council. Supreme General Vorth of the Korath Dominion rose from his seat, his reptilian features twisted with barely contained rage. He demanded to know if humans were threatening the Council. Jacob answered calmly. He said no. They were educating the Council. For 60 years, Earth tried to earn respect through diplomacy and peaceful cooperation. That approach failed because respect was not given to the peaceful. It was given to the powerful. Jacob pointed to the display showing the destroyed Zarthak fleet. This was power, he said. But more importantly, it represented a fundamental shift in how warfare worked. Every ship in every fleet across the galaxy was designed assuming conventional physics. Battles were fought in 3 dimensions with predictable weapons and defenses. The Sentinel changed everything. Earth had 7 more ships just like it, with construction beginning on 20 more. The chamber erupted in chaos. Species that had been enemies for centuries forgot their rivalries to discuss this new threat. Elder Caney of the ancient Thandros Empire raised his hand for silence. The chamber gradually quieted. Elder Caney asked why humans were revealing this capability. They could have kept these vessels secret and used them as hidden weapons. Instead, they showed their hand to the entire galaxy. Jacob met the elder's gaze steadily. He said secrecy was the tactic of the weak. Humanity was not hiding anymore. Earth was announcing openly that they possessed technology, which fundamentally changed the balance of power. They were doing this because they wanted something in return. Elder Caney asked what that was. Peter Collins stepped forward again. He said humanity wanted respect and partnership, the same consideration given to any other spacefaring civilization. They were not asking for special treatment. They were demanding equality. Admiral Bennett continued explaining Earth's proposal. The display changed to show a comprehensive agreement. First, all human colonies and outposts would receive the same protection under galactic law as any other species settlements. No more raids and no more unauthorized military actions in human space. Second, Earth would gain full voting rights in the Council with representation equal to any other major power. Third, and most importantly, they proposed a technology exchange. Earth's dimensional research in exchange for access to technologies humans currently lacked. Lord Zethan laughed, though it sounded nervous. He asked if humans expected the Council to simply accept these demands. What leverage did they truly have beyond one class of experimental warships? Jacob smiled coldly. He said he would show them. The display changed to real-time footage. 8 ships identical to the Sentinel hung in orbit around Neptune. All were fully operational, but that was not what made the assembled delegates gasp. Jacob explained that these ships were currently in normal space around Earth's home system. He told them to watch what happened when a single command was given. All 8 ships simultaneously phased out of existence. They disappeared from every sensor and every detection method the galaxy possessed. Dr. Linda Morrison explained that the ships were still there. They existed in 7th dimensional space. From the perspective of everyone watching, they had ceased to exist. They could be anywhere in the galaxy, and no one would know until they chose to reveal themselves. She let that information sink in before continuing. She asked the delegates to imagine being a military commander, confident in defenses and fleet strength and orbital platforms. Then, without warning, one of these ships phased into normal space directly above a home world. How would anyone defend against a threat they could not detect until it was too late? The 8 Sentinel-class ships phased back into normal space above Neptune, proving they had been there all along. Admiral Bennett stated firmly that this was not a threat. It was a reality check. Earth was not interested in conquest or domination. They simply wanted what every species in the chamber already had: the security of knowing their people were protected and the respect of being treated as equals. The Council called a recess for deliberations. In private chambers, the leaders of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations gathered for an emergency meeting. Lady Sylvana said this was a catastrophe. Humans had leapfrogged millennia of conventional development. Their entire fleet doctrine was obsolete overnight. Elder Caney corrected her. He said their fleets were not obsolete, but merely inadequate against this specific threat. But he asked how many of these vessels Earth could actually produce. They mentioned 20 under construction. Against hundreds of thousands of ships in combined galactic fleets, that number seemed insignificant. Supreme General Vorth shook his head. He said the Elder was missing the point. It was not about numbers. One human ship had destroyed an entire Zarthak fleet. 20 of them could terrorize half the galaxy before countermeasures were developed. Lord Zethan suggested they must develop those countermeasures. Surely if humans discovered dimensional travel, then other species could replicate it. Lady Sylvana asked if that was possible. The human approach was fundamentally different. They did not gradually advance through technological stages like every other species. They skipped entire generations of development to focus on one radical innovation. Elder Caney spoke slowly. He said perhaps that was exactly the point humans were making. The Council dismissed them because they did not follow the expected path. Because they were young and different. In doing so, the galaxy failed to recognize that being different might be humanity's greatest strength. The private chambers opened and the galactic leaders returned to their seats. Elder Caney stood to address the assembly. He said the Council had deliberated on Earth's proposal. This was an unprecedented situation requiring an unprecedented response. He looked directly at the human delegation. The Council had underestimated humanity. That much was clear. Humans had developed capabilities that challenged understanding of warfare and physics. Elder Caney paused, and the fate of humanity's place in the galaxy hung in the balance. He said therefore the Council accepted Earth's proposal with amendments. First, all human colonies would receive immediate protection under galactic law effective immediately. Any species violating this would face unified Council action. Second, Earth was granted full voting rights and would be represented in all major Council decisions. Third, the technology exchange was accepted with one condition. Earth must share fundamental principles of dimensional travel with the Council's scientific community, not complete technology, but enough for others to develop their own understanding. Peter Collins stepped forward. He said the third condition was acceptable with their own amendment. The Council must establish a joint research initiative with human scientists working alongside the galaxy's best minds. They would share the discovery but help guide its development. Elder Caney considered this, then nodded agreement. The vote was called. This time when Ear,